Okay, hello everyone, this is Gareth from the iMoot team. Proudly like to present Andrew Downs, who's going to talk about Tin Can in Moodle. Thank him very much for putting these slides together and spending the time on this very sunny Sunday here. And also thank Big Blue Button for providing software and capability just to run these sessions. Thank you, Andrew.
Right, well, we'll make a start. So, yeah, as Gareth said, I'm presenting from sunny England. It's a lovely sunny day here. And I'm actually at my sister's 25th birthday party. She's having a barbecue, so I snuck away for an hour to talk to you guys about Tin Can. This presentation, I've got a number of slides, 29 it's telling me here. But if you've got questions and comments and that kind of thing, feel free to type them in the chat or let me know if you want to share them on the microphones. I don't know how many of you have got microphones. But I want this to be a really interactive session. There's going to be a number of points specifically where I'm going to be asking you questions, but if you want to comment at any time, please do. So, I'll start with a quick introduction to me. Yeah, my name is Andrew Downs, and I work for a company called Epic, based in Brighton in the UK. Epic are an e-learning company. We do pretty much everything you can think of relating to e-learning. And actually, Epic's not going to exist much longer. We're merging with another company called Line Communications, and we're getting a new name and a new brand, which I don't know what it is yet. So it'll be some new company. But that's where I work at the moment. I'm part of the group that was involved in writing the Tin Can API specification. So you may not know that Tin Can is an open source standard and developed by a community. So the people behind the SCORM standard, ADL, they sort of kicked it off. But there's been loads of other organizations and individuals involved in developing the standard. And I'm one of them. And you see that image there. That's the graph of contributions on GitHub. And I'm quite proud to say that I'm top left on that graph, or certainly when that screenshot was taken. I think I still am. I run a website called tincanapi.co.uk, and there's loads of resources on there aimed at learning designers and learning developers. Really, the idea is to help you actually get started with Tin Can. There's loads of resources online that tell you what Tin Can is, but certainly when I first created that site, there wasn't very much showing you how to get started. And so it's that how to get started that I address on this particular website. Whereas today we're talking more about what Tin Can is and how it relates to Moodle. This little image here is just to say that I've written a few plugins for Moodle. Really, they're all in the prototype stage. I wouldn't recommend actually using any of my plugins on a production environment at this stage, but hopefully, fingers crossed, there might be some stuff in the works to get those production ready. I'm also on the board of an open source project called Learning Locker. Learning Locker is a learning record store, which is essentially a database where you can store Tin Can data. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Learning Locker and show you Learning Locker later on in this presentation. So that's me. What are we going to do in this session? Well, we're going to start with an introduction. In fact, we're nearly at the end of the introduction. I'm then going to talk about SCORM and about Tin Can. So SCORM is an e-learning standard, quite an old e-learning standard. And I'm going to talk about how Tin Can is different and more modern. I'm then going to talk about Tin Can in Moodle. So that turquoise section there, that's really generic stuff about Tin Can. I'm not going to talk about Moodle specifically. And then when we move on to the green section, I'm going to talk specifically relating to Moodle. How does Tin Can fit into Moodle? And I'm going to also talk about, at the same time really, I'm going to talk about progress so far. So I'm going to talk about how we could implement Tin Can in Moodle, and then I'm also going to talk about what we've done so far in that direction. And there'll be time at the end for questions. I've got a couple of questions that I think you might have that I've created slides for, but then obviously you may have questions of your own that I haven't thought of. But you can ask questions throughout the presentation as well. I won't necessarily answer them immediately. I might wait until I get to the end of what I'm saying, but I'll try and answer them as we go through. So let's talk about SCORM and Tin Can. So let's start with SCORM. And I want to know what you guys know about SCORM. So as I said, I'm expecting participation and involvement here. So there's some questions on the screen there. Pick a question that you want to answer, and write your answers in the chat. I'd like to see each of you, answer at least one of these questions. Have a go at one of these questions. Or if you really have never heard of SCORM before, tell me that you've never heard of SCORM before. I've got an answer from Frank here. A way to deliver content in an organized, linear fashion. Yep, that's right, Frank. Anything from anyone else? A way to prepare outside content so it plays nice in an LMS from the teacher side. Standard to communicate with learning management systems. Actually, those two definitions from Andrea and David work quite well together because there's two parts to SCORM. One part is what's known as the content aggregation model, and that's how you take a block of content, you package it up into a zip file, and then you can load it inside an LMS. But it's also a communication standard where that content, once it's inside the LMS, it has to communicate with the LMS. SCORM does tend to be quite complicated, and a lot of people do have that love-hate relationship with SCORM. It can be very difficult to work with. I asked this question at a face-to-face event recently, and somebody said they have developers that work for them that aren't really learning isn't their background. They're developers that have come from outside the world of learning. And when he shows them SCORM, they say, "Why are we using this? This is old stuff. This is overcomplicated." They don't like it at all. Whereas when it shows developers Tin Can, they say, "Okay, we get this. This is a modern RESTful web service. We understand this. This makes sense." So SCORM can be quite difficult to work with. SCORM's also quite old. So when was it created? Actually, originally created back in 1999. The most commonly used version of SCORM is SCORM 1.2, and that was released in 2001. So really a long time ago. We're talking 13 years ago, more than nearly 13 and a half now. And if you think the world has changed quite a lot since then. Mobile internet, social media. I think Facebook probably existed, but probably wasn't used that much. Probably MySpace was the social media network of popularity at the time SCORM came out. And broadband wasn't really universal. And really, SCORM was designed for a world of corporate intranets rather than for a world of the internet. So that's why you've got this content aggregation model. You take content and you can upload it to an intranet, a school intranet or a corporate intranet. Sarah, I'm not sure if you're trying to speak to us there. I've just got some echo. You've muted yourself. Okay. So that's what SCORM is. And this is an overview diagram of how SCORM works. So you'll notice all of this happens inside the LMS. And pay close attention to this diagram because there's a test on the next slide. No worries, Sarah. So everything's happening within the LMS. So the LMS might be something like Moodle, might be another LMS. And the e-learning is actually uploaded to the LMS. It sits on the LMS, and it uses SCORM to communicate with a database that's also inside the LMS. And then you have reports also inside the LMS that read from that database. And the LMS might do other things as well as SCORM. So obviously things like the Moodle quizzes and forums and all that stuff. That will record stuff in the database that can be reported on as well. And really all the data is moving from right to left in this diagram. It's all going from the e-learning, from the other learning experiences, into the database and into the reporting tools. That's not to say that all of the data goes that way in SCORM. Obviously you can get data back from the LMS and your e-learning, but generally the system is designed to facilitate the data moving in that direction, and more data moves in that direction. So here's another diagram, similar looking, different words, and I said there'd be a test. Can you spot the difference between those two diagrams? What's changed? Bidirectional, yeah, there's a few other things. I'll just explain that bidirectional thing. So the data can go in both directions. So data can come back from the LRS into the e-learning. And the really the standard design for data, any piece of data, to go in either direction, and to go in all over the place. So the data can go from the e-learning to the reports as before, but you could also have the data going the other way, reports going through to the e-learning, or potentially data could go from one learning experience into another learning experience. And I think that's one of the key advantages of Tin Can, is that what happens in one learning experience can inform what happens in another learning experience, because that data is bidirectional. Multiple external sources, David said, and Frank's mentioned that the LRS is new. So yeah, the multiple external sources, so you could have different sources feeding into the LRS. And the LRS is, obviously we had the database at the center of the LMS before, but now we've got an LRS, a learner record store, that can actually sit independently on the internet. This could be on its own server, separate from the e-learning. So if you imagine if you've got generic e-learning content, that might be hosted and updated and maintained by the people that produce that generic e-learning content, and that's been reported to on your particular LRS. You could also have multiple LRSs, so you could have data going off to another LRS that feeds into different reporting tools and different things like that. Another important difference to note is that this says the internet rather than the LMS. So as I mentioned, everything can be on a different server. It could all be on the same server, but it can be distributed across different and different organisations might manage different tools. Some other differences between SCORM and Tin Can. SCORM deals with status. So at any given point in time, I have a success status for a piece of e-learning. I've either passed, or I've failed, or I've not completed, or I've completed. And I might have a score. And SCORM's really to do with looking at your status at a particular point in time, whereas Tin Can looks at events, and basically it's more to do with telling a story. And Tin Can is based on the activity streams standard. Activity streams you'll be familiar with if you use Twitter or Facebook or any social media. You have a wall or a feed or a news stories list or an activity stream, and all of that is using the activity stream standard to basically say somebody did something. We use the phrase in Tin Can, I did this. So here's a slide about Tin Can events and just some example events below, and the idea is you could take something from any of these columns, match it together and make an event. And this is just a list of examples. Obviously you could have many different types of people with any verb and any activity at the other end. And that can be important for tracking and reporting. So you might report an activity stream, but you also need to think about if you're designing for Tin Can, what's the result of an event? So as I said, different learning activities can feed into one another. So what happens in one learning activity, an event, might trigger an action in another learning activity. And finally, another difference between SCORM and Tin Can is that SCORM tracks a fixed set of metrics. So SCORM will track a score, normally out of 100, it can be a raw score, and it'll also track completion status. Did someone complete something? Which is fine for kind of next quiz e-learning, the kind of e-learning that you might produce in most of the authoring tools available on the market today. But what if you want to design a learning experience that's a little bit different? So Epic's parent company, LTG, have just recently acquired a learning games company called Preloaded. And Preloaded make a whole range of different learning games. I've not had a chance to look at them yet. But I imagine that some of those games don't really have a concept of completion. If you think about some games that you might have played recently, maybe they are learning games, maybe they're not learning games, but not all games have an idea of being complete. Sometimes it's about getting a higher and higher score and constantly beating that higher score. If you think about learning simulations, maybe the aim is to improve and to get better, and you can just keep doing it and getting better and better and trying different things within the simulation. And you can never complete that simulation. You're just getting better and better. So just think about pilot training or astronaut training or something like that. Learning to fly a plane. You never complete learning to fly a plane. You're constantly learning more about that, and so you never have necessarily a concept of completion. So with Tin Can, we can design our learning experiences to suit what we're trying to teach, and then we need to design the tracking to suit that experience. And that design of tracking is a new concept in Tin Can as well. Whereas in SCORM, you don't really design SCORM tracking. You either do it or you don't. Whereas with Tin Can, there are design decisions to be made in Tin Can tracking. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So Tin Can be used to track anything that can communicate with the internet. So whereas SCORM can only track e-learning and a particular type of e-learning, Tin Can literally can track. If it can communicate with the internet, you can use Tin Can to track it. And there's various things on the screen there. But you can also think quite creatively with that. So connecting to the internet. Well, what about tracking? Well, I'm at a barbecue at the moment. Could that barbecue be connected to the internet? Well, yes, because I'll take photos of the barbecue and post them on Facebook. And somebody, if it was, maybe it's not a barbecue, maybe it's a classroom lesson, the teacher might record my attendance at that classroom lesson, and that attendance register could be connected to the internet. So anything that can communicate with the internet can actually be quite broad if we think about how we can connect real face-to-face events into the internet, and how we already do. So we can track anything with Tin Can, and we can track blended learning. Now, last time I had this session, I asked what blended learning was, and we had a few answers, but it took a bit of time to get some answers. Does anyone have a good definition of blended learning, or shall I explain it to you guys? Combination of face-to-face and web. Yep, that's similar to the answers that we had last time. Blended learning in practice often is combining e-learning and face-to-face learning. But actually, blended learning, the definition is a little bit broader than that. Just really combining two or more different modes of learning. So face-to-face and e-learning might be two of them, but asynchronous and synchronous is a very good example, Andrea. It might be two different types of face-to-face learning. So, face-to-face lectures and seminars, that's blended learning. And an online course that's also got some kind of email element to it, that could be considered blended learning. So it's not necessarily mixing face-to-face and web. And yeah, the asynchronous and synchronous description is another good one. But yeah, it could be any multiple types of learning. But in practice, often our blended learning looks like the pictures on the left-hand side of the screen. So we've got all these different learning experiences, and like a shopping basket or a packed lunch or a TV dinner, all of these learning experiences are individual. They're separate. So I used to work for a college, and we had e-learning and we had face-to-face sections. And one of the really big challenges was getting the teaching staff to use the e-learning in a way that was complementary to the face-to-face sessions, rather than duplicating what was done in the e-learning. Because if they duplicate what was in the e-learning, firstly, they're not covering all the content they're supposed to be covering because they don't have enough time. And secondly, the students don't do the e-learning, or they don't turn up to the face-to-face lessons because they're getting the content elsewhere. So really, it's important to blend your learning, your different elements of learning together. and I've coined this phrase pure-age learning, which I don't think is going to catch on, but I'm going to keep putting it in my presentations until people start using it. And the idea here is if you make a cake, you don't think, oh, that's a nice piece of butter, that's a nice piece of sugar. When you're eating a cake, you think that is a nice cake. Hopefully, I'm going to have some birthday cake later on today, for my sister's birthday, and I'll enjoy that cake. I won't enjoy the butter, I won't enjoy the sugar, but I'll enjoy the cake as a whole. And our learning experiences should really be like that. We've got different elements that make up the blend, but it's all one learning experience. And the idea is that Tin Can be used to link up the different learning experiences. So what happens in that face-to-face classroom will cause a different experience when you do the online learning by triggering different events. So an event that happens in one activity can be responded to in another. So we've got a question from David here. Is the tracking used by Tin Can akin to tagging, but then you determine how it will be represented or quantified? I wouldn't necessarily call it tagging. It's recording events, and then yeah, you do need to design reports that will determine how that's represented. But you can report things like scores and other numerical things in Tin Can that could be turned into a report. But certainly, yeah, there's a lot more flexibility in how Tin Can could be reported on. Does that answer your question, David? I'm not sure I fully understood the question. If you want to ask a follow-up question on that, please feel free to. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. So I've got some questions for you guys. I want to know, well, firstly, hands up. I don't know if you've worked out how to do the hands. In fact, I'm not sure I know how to use the hands, but they worked it out in the last session. So put your hands up if you use the SCORM module in Moodle. A couple of hands there from David, Kay, Sarah, a few more. It's like most people using the SCORM module in Moodle. Yeah, I'm not sure if Jane and Lisa, if you do use the SCORM module, or if you just couldn't work out how to raise your hand, but it looks like most people use the SCORM module in Moodle. So any e-learning that's done in the SCORM module can also be tracked with Tin Can, but other activities can be tracked as well. So things like the quizzes, the chat, the forums, all of those could potentially be tracked with Tin Can. But not just stuff that happens inside the Moodle, but other learning activities outside of Moodle. So what sort of activities do your learners do outside of Moodle? Any learning activities go on outside of Moodle? Tutor to you. What's tutor to you, Kay? Okay, yeah, so external learning websites. So often people will use those for learning. And with Tin Can, we can give people what's known as a bookmarklet, where they have a little button on their browser that they can click to record that they've visited a certain website. Or potentially, if it's a website where you've got a contact with a supplier, maybe you've got a relationship with them, you could ask them to implement Tin Can tracking or that, but they might do it anyway. And then you can get that Tin Can data. Labs. So labs is a great one. I imagine that in lab, I don't know anything about labs, but I assume that there are computers involved in labs, and so potentially you could embed Tin Can tracking into the particular piece of the software that students use in labs, which could then feed into your learning experience and learning tracking. Okay, so there's a wide range of things that learners do outside of Moodle, some of which is more formal things that you have control over. Others are less formal, and you don't really know what the learners are going to be doing. But all of it can be tracked by Tin Can in one way or another. And we've got the David said uses the offline assignment type in Moodle because to account for the various different activities learners can be doing externally, but then learners have to manually record the event. And that's one of the challenges with Tin Can, I suppose, are that yes, Tin Can track everything with manual recording of the event, but then you rely on the student being motivated to record that event. And where Tin Can, I think, is most powerful is where we can make it automatic, where we can embed that tracking into a website, into a piece of laboratory equipment, into whatever the learner's doing, and then track that kind of thing. I was talking to a university recently who was saying that they actually track when learners log on to the campus Wi-Fi. They didn't even realise they were tracking this, but just the system that they use does track that, and so they can use that data to work out how often the students are visiting the campus and where they're going on campus, and then compare that to information about attendance and submitting assignments and general success. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that we can track. Okay, so let's talk about Moodle and Tin Can. So you may have seen that there's a Moodle tracker for implementing Tin Can. If you're interested in Tin Can, you might have found that on Google. And that's actually in the top 10 most voted tracker items in Moodle is implementing Tin Can into Moodle. But implementing Tin Can in Moodle could mean one of a number of different things. And so I want to take you through what those different things are, and then I'm also going to talk about, well, what progress can be made on each of those things. So let's start off. The first one is that we can use Moodle to launch e-learning. So we'll start off in Moodle. The learner then follows a link, an activity in Moodle, to go to a piece of e-learning content that may be hosted on another server. And that e-learning content tracks to an LRS. There's some other data going into the LRS from elsewhere. It's all feeding through into reports. So that's quite a simple way that we can use Moodle to launch Tin Can content. And there's actually 2 plugins that you can use for this at the moment, but they're not without their problems. So I'll explain where we are with that. The first one is the SCORM Cloud plugin. So if you work with SCORM, you'll probably be familiar with SCORM Cloud. SCORM Cloud is often the LMS that people use to test SCORM-based e-learning content. And SCORM Cloud actually has a SCORM plugin that you can use with Moodle to replace the standard SCORM player, and that will actually play the e-learning content on SCORM Cloud and then feed the information back into Moodle. And they've actually modified that plugin so that it supports Tin Can packages. So if you make a piece of Tin Can e-learning, maybe with Adobe Captivate or another authoring tool, you can upload that to the SCORM Cloud plugin and track that back to SCORM Cloud. But that only works with SCORM Cloud. It doesn't work with any other LRS. So if you're wanting to use another LRS, maybe Learning Locker, which is an open source LRS, maybe Wax LRS, you can't do that with this particular plugin. Only use SCORM Cloud service. The other option is you can use a plugin that I've written, which I call the Tin Can Launch plugin. And that, whereas the SCORM Cloud plugin, you have to upload the content as a package, a bit like it's a SCORM package. With my plugin, you put the content anywhere on the internet, and you point the plugin at that content, a bit like a link. But it's a special link that allows, it basically tells the content which LRS to send data to, and launches that content properly. That plugin is available in the plugins directory, the section in the plugins directory, but it's not really ready for production yet. It's not very secure for a start. It doesn't look very nice, and it's fairly basic. So it needs a bit more work before it's ready to be used in such an environment. Not 100% sure how secure the SCORM Cloud plugin is, to be honest. I don't know. So yeah, take care with that one as well. I'm not saying that that's any more secure than this one. What I'm saying is that this one isn't secure, and I don't know about that one. So I want to give you a quick demo now of this plugin. So let me just set that up. And I've got a few demos here. Unfortunately, it does take a little while to set up the screen for sharing. So bear with me whilst I do that. Okay, so do that. There we are. You probably can't see there. So let's go to Moodle, and I've got an example of a Moodle course here. Just ignore the stuff on the right for now. And I've got two examples of the Tin Can launch link here. So there's one example. You can see the ugly screen now. The screen that needs to be made to look nice. And then I've got two options here. I can launch a new attempt, or I can launch a previous attempt. I'm going to launch a previous attempt earlier. And I get a message, would I like to resume where I previously left off? And that's a message from the e-learning itself. And this is particularly ugly demo e-learning. This is an example of your standard next quiz e-learning. There we are, there's the quiz at the end. Let's have a go at answering some of these questions here. I'm going to get some of them right. Holes, some of them wrong. A lot of questions here, aren't there? There we are, at the end. Submit answers. So I've now submitted those questions. I can go back to the Moodle. You notice if I go to my LRS, you can see that this is tracked that I've answered all of those questions at the LRS. The data, the learner has gone from Moodle to the e-learning, and Moodle has told the e-learning to track to my particular LRS, and you'll notice that e-learning is actually hosted on the internet, whereas my LRS is actually hosted on my local laptop, and so is my Moodle. So the learner's gone from my laptop to this other server. They've completed the e-learning, and Moodle has told the e-learning to track this data back to the LRS on my laptop. So that's an example of one, a standard piece of e-learning being tracked with Tin Can, launched from Moodle. Another example, the Tetris example. Should be able to guess what this one is. This is the example of a game. I nearly said a learning game. It's not a learning game, but it's just to demonstrate that games, some of which could be learning games, can be tracked with Tin Can. So I'm going to complete level 1. You can't fail level 1 at this particular event. Completed level 1, and then if I close that, go back to Learning Locker, refresh the page, you can see that I've completed level 1 of Tetris there. And if I click on this, the data that's coming through, and you'll see that somewhere I have a score. Where is it? Yep, I got a score of 672. So there we are. So Tin can be used to track games as well. You see, in this case, we are tracking that I completed the game and I completed the level, but more importantly, we're tracking what's happened in that level. We're tracking that I managed to make 0 lines. I'm not sure what APM stands for. I think maybe average score per level. Tracking the amount of time. Okay, so let's close that now. I've got a question from Frank. Brad, dot, in my chat window. Frank, yeah, that looks probably. So Frank, are you working with the folks at Curator? So Curator is essentially it's a learning management system, but it's very different from Moodle in how it works. It's more game-based. It's more designed for, I suppose, smaller scale courses, and it's about taking content that already exists on the internet and pulling it into a learner management system. And Curator actually fully adopts Tin Can tracking. It's all tracked with Tin Can. And Curator is produced by a company called HT2, which is not part of Epic or Epic's parent company, but we work quite closely with HT2. And HT2 are the same company that are behind Learning Locker. And Learning Locker is the open source LRS I'm on the technical board for. So I suppose the short answer to the question is yes, we are working with Ben Betts and Dave Tosh and guys at Curator. David's asking, does TinCan work with any LMS? So any LMS could adopt TinCan. So, but it requires, obviously, the people producing the LMS to implement TinCan. So Moodle currently does not implement TinCan, but we've got some progress, which is what I'm telling you about in this presentation. Other LMSs may adopt TinCan more fully, but TinCan adoption isn't really a binary thing. With SCORM, people either say yes, it's SCORM compliant, or no, it isn't SCORM compliant, and that's very much a yes or no question. Actually, SCORM probably is a bit more, not as black and white as that, but people often think it is. But with TinCan, it's even less black and white. So with TinCan, to say, does it support TinCan, that's fine as a question, but you then need to ask the follow-up question, okay, what does it do with TinCan? So if I'm buying a car, I want to know that the car supports petrol or diesel or whatever. That's fairly basic. You need to know that it supports standard petrol, but I also want to know a few other things about this car before I buy it, not just that it supports petrol. What does it do with that petrol? Does it suck the petrol in and squirt it out the roof, or does it actually go somewhere? And so, yeah, you ask what does the LMS do with TinCan? Feel free to keep asking questions as we go through. So, question for you actually at this point. Do you use an e-learning authoring tool to create e-learning? So we talked about launching e-learning. Does anyone use a particular e-learning authoring tool? And which one do you use? Got a hand up from Sarah there. Sarah, which e-learning authoring tool do you use? Articulate Studio, MyUdo2, Captivate. I've not heard of MyUdo2. A few Captivates there. Captivate seems to be quite a popular one, actually. We had a lot of Captivates in the last session, which surprised me because a lot of the time storylines seem to be the more common one when I speak to them. So I don't know if the Moodle community prefers Captivate. And Xerxes is another good one. I used Xerxes probably about 5 years ago now. I wasn't so impressed with it at the time, but hopefully it's progressed a bit since then. Adobe Presenter. So I'm not sure about a lot of these actually, but I know that Articulate Storyline and Captivate both support TinCan. But what you need to be careful about with Articulate Storyline is that it supports an old version of TinCan. So TinCan, we released version 1 of TinCan back in April 2013, but before that there were kind of some beta releases of the specification. So they weren't really ready to be used, but they were there for people to experiment with. And Articulate Storyline, which was great at the time, they implemented one of these beta releases. Unfortunately, they've not upgraded to 1.0 since then, which means that I probably wouldn't recommend doing TinCan tracking with Articulate Storyline, but other tools like Adobe Captivate do support the latest version of TinCan. And so I'd recommend Gomo Learning, obviously, because that's Epic's particular tool. But I'd always, more generically, I'd recommend, if you're looking to do TinCan, get a tool that supports version 1.0 of TinCan. So UD2 creates SCORM, SCORM 2004, you probably mean there. Yeah, Moodle doesn't support SCORM 2004. They only support SCORM 1.2. Yeah, I don't know if UD2 also supports TinCan or if they've got any plans to support TinCan. But if you use UD2, ask them, are you planning to support TinCan? And if they need any help, ask them to get in touch with me, and I'll be more than happy to offer them some advice. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. So we've seen that Moodle can launch e-learning content, which can then be tracked back to an LRS. Moodle could also pull data out of an LRS. So we might have reports that sit within Moodle that track that e-learning activity, and they might also track other things that feed into the LRS. So we're talking about Moodle as a consumer of TinCan data. And again, I've got there's a couple of plugins, some examples for that. So firstly, I've got the TinCan Learner Stream plugin that I've produced, and really that's just an early example. So what that does is it takes TinCan data and it spews it out onto the page. It doesn't really do anything else. So that's again one that probably needs some work. We've then also the Tin Can launch plugin that you've seen can actually set completion based on particular Tin Can data. So Moodle will look up data in the LRS and set completion for that activity based on that. And as I mentioned before, that Tin Can launch plugin isn't ready for production. So let's have a look at those two. I'll do another screen share. Loading. Okay, so what you should be able to see here, we've got the ticks here, and you see that Tetris example, because I completed it, that's now got a tick next to it, because Moodle has detected that particular statement has arrived. You'll also see that we've got this learner stream here, and this is pulling through basically all of my Tin Can tracking data, or certainly the high-level statement of the Tin Can tracking data. It's not pulling through my scores and that kind of thing, it's just saying, admin user completed Tetris. That's coming through as a stream from the LRS. That's that one. Fairly simple in that case. Any questions or comments on that, please fire away. If not, we'll move on to the next screen. So I asked this question in the last session, and everyone said no. But let's have. Sorry, let me just put Sarah's hand down for her, and then let's have hands up again. Does anybody use data inside Moodle generated outside of Moodle? Then anyone pull data into Moodle from anywhere? Put your hands up or put a comment in the chat. Nobody? Okay. Oh, we've got somebody. No, Frank doesn't. Okay, nobody does. It sounds like. So sometimes institutions will pull things like attendance data or information about maybe exams into their learner management system, and that can be used to maybe create a dashboard for learners or information for tutors, that kind of thing. And I was at the Moodle in Edinburgh fairly recently, and there was a guy, I think it was from Edinburgh College or somewhere like that, and he was saying that he basically was demoing his system that he's got, where it pulls in data from all these various different sources, the library and attendance, and it displays this Facebook-like feed about what a learner's done and how well they're doing, and provides information back to the learner. And I asked the question, is your code available? Because I want to pinch it. Hopefully it'll be open source. And he said, well, actually, it probably wouldn't be useful to anybody else because we've got bespoke integrations with all our different systems. And often that's the way of it. If people are integrating data into their Moodle, they will create a bespoke integration. Whereas if you were to use Tin Can to get that data in, it doesn't, because it's not bespoke, it's more reusable for other people, and it's more reusable for the person that creates it as well. So you create your Tin Can integration in Moodle once, and then you plug in different tools as you go forward. I'll talk about that topic at the end. So we've talked about launching stuff from Moodle, launching e-learning from Moodle. We've talked about feeding data into reports. We can also track other Moodle activities and even pull data into other Moodle activities. So I think the quiz module, the forums, things like that are often commonly used tools. So where are we at with that? Well, firstly, we have a plan. I don't know, did anybody read the Moodle 2.7 release notes? Thrilling stuff. Well, I don't know if you did release them or not, but if you did read them or not, sorry. But there's actually mention of Tin Can in the Moodle 2.7 release notes. There's a new plugin type called the log plugin, and it seems like that was designed specifically with Tin Can in mind. Obviously, the idea is that it can be used for other purposes as well. And that log plugin type can be used to hook into Moodle's events API and fire off data to external systems, such as an LRS. So we can use that plugin type. and I've actually got a working proof of concept. It's actually designed for Moodle 2.6, this particular version. So it's actually a report plugin, which doesn't quite fit, which is why I think we've now got the log plugin types. And what this does is it doesn't modify the Moodle quiz at all. There's no customization to the Moodle quiz required. But the Moodle quiz will fire off an event to say that the learner submitted a quiz, and this plugin listens to that event and then sends the data to the LRS. So let's have a quick look at that in action. And this is really just it's not even a proof of concept, it's just me playing around to see what's possible and to inform the design of that plugin. Which I suppose is a proof of concept. Let's see if I can share that with you. So we'll start sharing. So you can see we've got the quiz here. Now there is a bug in this where at the moment for some reason I have to actually launch the quiz twice for it to work. As I said, it's not anywhere near a finished thing that you can use. It's just to show you what's possible. So we've launched it once. Let's launch it again. We go into the quiz. This particular quiz has only got one question in it, but obviously you can have more questions in quizzes. Next. Then submit the quiz. Yes, we really do want to submit the quiz. Wait a little bit. And then we can go back to the course. And you can see admin user attempted example quiz. And if we go back to Learning Locker, we can see we've got the same information there and some tracking data coming through. I don't even know if we've got the score yet. No, so it's a very basic example, not even recording the score, but we could record the score with a little bit more work. So that's that. Okay. So does anybody use data generated by Moodle outside your Moodle? So somehow you're taking data out of Moodle into another system and using that data in some way? Nobody? Well, again, if you are, or if you were going to, you could use TinCam for that, and there's the same advantages. Christoph, and we've got a hand from Sarah as well. In a student management system, we've got a few examples there. Does anyone want to give me a few more details? So, David, what is a student management system, or Christoph, or Sarah? Do you want to tell us what you do? Various custom reports, reporting system. Yeah, so if you're reporting, ThinCan could be a very useful candidate for that. So obviously you've got your bespoke methods of getting this data out, but if you were to use ThinCan, you could potentially feed that into a system and then use off-the-shelf ThinCan reports rather than having to develop your own bespoke reporting tool. Having said that, there are no off-the-shelf ThinCan reports at the moment, but hopefully in future there will be. And also, if you were going to use TinCan to get some data out, you could then have a range of sources all using TinCan feeding into the same system. Okay, thank you for that. Everyone's sharing there. And finally, you could put an LRS inside Moodle. So you notice this looks quite similar to SCORM. Everything's happening within the LMS. You've got the e-learning inside the LMS, tracking to essentially a database that's inside the LMS, reports inside the LMS, although the data can be used outside the LMS. And there has been some progress in putting an LRS into Moodle, but I think actually this isn't the route to go down, I don't think. Firstly, building an LRS is actually quite a hard thing to do. Getting a fully client LRS. It's a lot of work, and that means getting it done properly is in Moodle. Getting somebody to invest those resources is going to be a challenge. And Learning Locker is an open source LRS, which I'm on the technical board for, so I am a bit biased. But I would recommend, let's just use Learning Locker. You wouldn't create an e-portfolio in Moodle. You'd use Mahara, and I think Learning Locker is the same. We don't need to create an LRS inside Moodle. We can use Learning Locker, and we can completely integrate that into Moodle. Got a question here from David, or a comment. Okay, so what I like about SCORM 2004 compliance is that you can personalize learning paths based on students' responses. I wish Moodle was able to support this. Does TinCan do this? Yeah, I mean, so what you can do in Moodle already is that you can have custom learning paths based on completion statuses, and you can also have custom learning paths based on quiz scores and that kind of thing. So TinCan, you could use TinCan to create personalized learning paths, absolutely, even more so than you do in SCORM. But you would need to do some work on Moodle to take advantage of that. You could use the Moodle completion system, but if it's individual questions, you might want to customize Moodle's conditional access. So you might have conditional access based on a particular TinCan event having been recorded in a particular LRS, for example. That would require a little bit of customization of Moodle, but I think it would be a nice thing to do. I hadn't thought of that before. So you see that's another way that TinCan could be integrated into Moodle. It kind of illustrates the point I made earlier that it's not an on-off thing. I don't know if Moodle can use if or then with completion tracking. Well, actually, David, Moodle 2.7 has brought out a whole new snazzy completion, not completion, conditional restricted access. That's the word I'm looking for. Brought out new snazzy restricted access rules that can use more Boolean logic, if or then sorts of things. I haven't tried it myself yet, but I've heard good things about it. So it may be that would be helpful. Yeah, it does sound impressive though. So try it out. Let me know what it's like. So back to TinCan anyway. So there is actually, if you really do want to go down the route of building an LRS into Moodle, which as I say is not my recommendation, there is a working couple of plugins that you can use. A guy called Jamie Smith or Smithy or something like that has created basically a local plugin, and then he's customized the SCORM module to work with that local plugin. And you can upload articulate storyline packages into there, and then you can basically track that to an LRS within Moodle. Designed for Moodle 2.4. It's not being maintained by anybody. Jamie's moved on to other things, and it only supports articulate storylines. So it's fairly early days for that one. It may be that Dan Martin, who's the guy that maintains the SCORM module, he was looking at it. I don't know if he's still looking at it, but yeah, it looks like that's not really going anywhere potentially, but I could be wrong. Okay, so hands up. Had anybody tried Learning Locker? I had a couple of people last time that had actually tried Learning Locker. Anybody tried it? And if you have, what are your thoughts? The nose there. Nose. Nobody's tried Learning Locker. Well, give it a go. Type Learning Locker into Google and have a go. It can be quite difficult to install if you're used to installing Moodles. It's very, very different to installing Moodle. So you almost need to forget everything that you know about installing Moodle and follow the instructions step by step, rather than thinking that guessing that you might know what you're doing. But if you start, it is easy to install. It's just different to install, and that can, because it's different. That makes sense. So yeah, have a go at Learning Locker. Little plug there. Okay, so we're moving on to the questions. Frank's asking, is there a demo site? I don't think there is, actually. There used to be, but I think it's not available at the moment. Hopefully there will be another one soon. So I think you do need to install it yourself at the moment. Have a look at the website. There are some videos on the website you can have a look. Okay, David's got a question here before I move on to some questions, other questions I thought you might have. What sort of costs are involved in using or developing Tinker activities? Are there authoring tools for development? So there are authoring tools you can use, but the authoring tools that support TinCan were designed for SCORM. So you can create SCORM style e-learning that uses TinCan tracking. And there probably are some advantages to that, but to really get the most out of TinCan, we need to be using authoring tools that were designed for a TinCan way of thinking. I did a presentation recently at a face-to-face event about TinCan-enabled learning design and thinking differently in design of our online learning, take advantage of TinCan. And you can't really do that thinking differently using an authoring tool that was designed for SCORM content and has had TinCan added onto it. So you can get started on TinCan relatively cheaply by just using an existing authoring tool and then maybe installing Learning Locker, although Learning Locker, again, probably isn't ready for production use. So you can kind of get started, but if you really want to take full advantage of TinCan, at the moment the costs are going to be fairly high because it's new and because you're probably going to be the first one doing whatever you're thinking about doing with TinCan. So yeah, I couldn't give you exact costs because it really depends on what you're going to do. But you might be talking tens of thousands of pounds rather than thousands of pounds, I would imagine, depending on exactly what you want to do with TinCan. Thank you, Frank. Is there a demo site on there? I should really know that. It's been on the board. But yes. So education grossly underfunded. Yeah, I mean it can be tricky for education institutions. It may be that I don't know if you've got developers in house, David, but it may be that your best approach is to see if you can get your developers, to get them to install Learning Locker and get them up to speed with some of the basics. And if you can do stuff in house, you can probably do stuff with a kind of a bit of a more of a step-by-step approach. There we are. So maybe have a look yourself, David, and see if you can get your head around Learning Locker, and have a look at my website, tincanapi.co.uk. There's a resource on there called Building Your First TinCan Activity. That's probably a good place to start on developing a little plugin for TinCan. And one of the advantages of using a standard like TinCan, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, is that you can build it bit by bit. You start using TinCan, you install Learning Locker, and you have a really basic activity that lets learners record that they visited a particular website. And it's probably not going to get used very much at first, and it's not going to be that useful at first, but you can build on that, and you can keep adding to it until you've got loads of things feeding in TinCan data, and then you're getting some really helpful reports out of it, and potentially you can then use that as an argument to get more funding. Now, if you can show that you can use learning analytics data to improve retention and success, then that's one way you may be able to access. So let's look at some questions that I thought you might have, and then I've got a section at the end for you to ask any other questions, but feel free to ask questions as I go through. So firstly, why use a standard? I've talked about this a little bit already. You might already use web services to get data in and out of Moodle. Why bother with a standard? Well, firstly, you can create a plugin once and then reuse it. So you can use TinCan for all of your data that's coming in and out of Moodle, or all the data that fits this particular model. You can keep all the data in the same format, and that means that building reporting tools is going to be a lot easier because you've got all the data in the same format, and you can use that same format data for some very flexible reporting tools. And also you're going to be compatible with future tools. So I mentioned earlier, off-the-shelf reporting tools. Well, they don't exist at the moment, but they probably will in the future. So by using TinCan, you're making yourself compatible with tools that probably will be developed in the future. Why TinCan as a standard? What about SCORM? What about Open Badges? What about LTI? Well, TinCan has already seen quite a lot of adoption. Most of the main authoring tools will support TinCan. A lot of LMSs support TinCan. There's been quite a lot of buzz around TinCan, particularly in the corporate learning world, to be honest, rather than the academic environment, which a lot of people at Moodle conferences tend to come from. But I think TinCan could be big in the education environment as well, in academia. And you can use TinCan alongside both Open Badges and LTI. They're not mutually exclusive. TinCan does slightly different things to Open Badges, and it's certainly different to LTI. And there's been several conversations about using Open Badges and LTI and TinCan all together for different purposes as part of a single tool. In terms of SCORM, you've already seen that SCORM is very old, and TinCan is really designed as a replacement for SCORM. You can translate. So I think I'll just answer that question for you, David. TinCan is meant to replace SCORM. ADL, the people who use SCORM, they have basically pushed for creation of TinCan. So the people that created SCORM and the people that own SCORM.com, both of those organisations are pushing TinCan. So really, I think SCORM is going the way of the dodo. It'll probably take a little while for it to disappear. Someone asked how long I think SCORM has left. I think it will take a little while, but I think SCORM will eventually be replaced by TinCan. You can actually translate SCORM data into TinCan data, but you can't translate it the other way, simply because TinCan data is much richer, contains a lot more information. So if you try to translate it to SCORM, you would lose a lot of data because SCORM just doesn't have mechanisms for storing the data. Okay, let's move on to the next question. It's great to see some people connecting in the chat there. Yeah, so does anyone have any more questions for me? Comments or suggestions, or did they want to share?
Hi Andrew, this is Gareth. First of all, can I thank you very much on this sunny afternoon for presenting, especially for the second time. The first time was brilliant, the second time was even better. And I'm sure the others will everyone will thank you as well. Everyone, please obviously put in the chat window or feel free to take the microphone. Once again, Andrew, thank you very much.